Hey guys, welcome back from the break. We left it with all these indicators of the crisis, and all these indicators showed that it was in 2008 where we could start seeing what was happening in Spain, but not really before. And we had elections due in 2008. And for that election, Zapatero ran, recognizing that the economy was decelerating. That was obvious. In 2007 already, the figures were not that great, and the curve was going down, decreasing. And but by the end of the day, his record was strong. I mean, we talked about the social policies that he put in place, stability in the country. We had a record of unemployment, low unemployment at that time, and he won the elections. Actually, he extended his majority, and he won 169 out of 350. So he was only six seats short from an absolute majority. So this was a rather stable government, we can say. And yeah, I mean, but from that day, only 100 days after he won the elections, he passed in Congress his first austerity plan. This austerity plan was rather modest, very, not really. The scope of it was, I think, it was 350 million euros. That was nothing. Later, we'll see that this austerity was much bigger. And by the end of the day, this was first in not hiring new. The administrations were not hiring anymore, and also there were salary reduction for high-level public officials and also political representatives, etc., etc. So very modest, but it was already. I mean, this was 100 days after he won the elections again. So this was already showing in which direction Spain was walking from 2008. After the G20 summit, I mean, it was there was an international consensus that at that point in time in 2008 that the best way to try to tackle these economic crisis was through public stimulus programs, and Spain put together what it was called Plan E. So by the end of the day, it was kind of a John Maynard Keynes model of economy. By the end of the day, was public money invested into I cannot find the word, into any kind of works, into any kind of projects that will dynamize the economy. By the end of the day, was public obras. I cannot find the word. But they building roads. You can know all these kind of infrastructures that any kind of infrastructure you can think of, all that being financed with public money. So companies will suffer less. And obviously, Spain, that was being hit by construction, was particularly hit in Spain. This was very important. However, the Plan A was not really well targeted, and it really didn't produce any kind of effect. But the Spanish economy was in so much trouble that this was kind of a small drop in the sea. So it didn't really have a strong impact. What else did Zapatero do? And this was already bigger. This was 2010 when the crisis was already there. I mean, this was undoubtable. I mean, we were talking about 10%, over 10% public deficit. Unemployment was skyrocketing at that time. And so what did Zapatero do? Labor market reform. First thing, collective bargaining agreements were suspended, even in case there was no agreement. So you know how collective bargaining agreements, one sector, trade unions in one sector negotiate with employers association, the conditions for workers in that sector. So minimum salary, specific causes for dismissal, anything that is only specific to a sector, and normally tries to protect workers in that sector. So these collective bargaining agreements will be suspended if, and these collective bargaining agreements have to be renewed every specific years. It's also decided in the collective bargaining agreement. So if no agreement was reached, and at this time during the economic crisis, quite likely it was not going to be the case, this will be suspended, and the general legislation and labor market will be the one affecting this work. So by the end of the day, this was downplaying the protection of workers in sectors, trying to, by the end of the day, save as many jobs as possible. Second thing that was introduced in this labor market reform is that employers could reduce working hours of their workers in case of economic need. By the end of the day, these obviously will affect the salary of the worker, but it was to at least protect the job while reducing the number of hours. Another thing that was included was actually these. You remember from the first half of the class, we were talking about the problem of temporary jobs. Actually, this labor market reform tried to make it harder to create to dismiss and create temporary jobs. Try to focus on fixed term, not fixed term, but open-ended contracts. However, it was very unsuccessful. And last thing that this labor market reform included was effective dismissal. And the main thing here was that companies will be allowed to dismiss employers if they could prove that they were losing money. That was not I mean, by the end of the day, this is a lawful way of dismissal. We're talking, I don't want to get too deep into dismissal legislation, but by the end of the day, here in Spain, if you dismiss an employer, it can be a lawful or an unlawful dismissal. This means that both of them go ahead, but in this one, if it's a lawful, you don't have to pay much compensation to that worker. However, in this one, if there's no cost for the dismissal, you do have to compensate the worker by the end of the day. So what the government did was that if the company was losing money, if they could prove that, and this time most Spanish companies were, dismissal was justified already. There was no extra cost to be given to the employer, and there will be no compensation from the side of the company. Obviously, they will be entitled to unemployment benefits, but that's another story. And this obviously was made all in order to try to protect as many jobs as possible. However, you could see how this was 2010, unemployment kept growing right after that. Last economic policy I'm going to be talking about today has to do with constitutional reform, and this is something very big, and this is something that I will talk about this on actually tomorrow when I keep talking about Zapatero's government, and I'm going to talk about the social unrest. We already kind of talked about 15M, but this constitutional reform was very controversial. Why? I mean, constitutional reforms are not common in Spain. Amendments are not that common, and there are two kind of amendments. One, if they affect these core rights. You remember that we talked in class about the fundamental rights and freedoms of the Constitution. If you are going to reform any of those articles, you do need to pass to vote in a referendum to bring it to the people. However, there are other articles, and here we're talking about Article 135, which was not protected, that with a large enough majority in Parliament, and here we're talking about 3/5 majority, you can pass it without a referendum. And this reform was about introducing budgetary stability as something that there was a mandate for governments. And this was actually something that was pushed from the European Union, the Eurozone. Spain at this time, I mean, we knew that we were in trouble. And in Europe, there was also, I mean, this was a collective problem. Maybe in each country has its own problems. European economies are connected with each other. So there was pressure from Brussels for Spain to guarantee budgetary stability and to seek budgetary stability. We saw how the public debt and public deficit were growing, and this was a massive problem. So this was a way to try to constitutionally make a mandate for governments to pursue that as an objective. And this was a bipartisan agreement. At that time, PSOE and PP had 90% of over 90% of the seats in parliament. This is something that right now is far from happening, but at that time they did. So obviously, in a sense, both of them were blamed for this. And this is actually something we're gonna take back on actually tomorrow when I tell you about that public unrest with Zapatero's government. And this was obviously very, very criticized because it was kind of made behind closed doors and not really brought to the public. So guys, this was about it. I mean, I tried to make it as brief as possible. I hope it's clear. If there are any doubts, please email me and I'll try to answer it as soon as possible. So yeah, guys, see you. This was it. Have a nice day. Bye.